Thank you, everyone. We have a very special part of the program now. Up till now, we've been focused on the events of 429 SAIGU and everything that's happened since. We have the distinct pleasure and honor of having leading voices of California to discuss the future of Koreatown, the future of the city of Los Angeles, and the future of California. To help us with this part of the program, let's go ahead and give the floor to NBC4 Southern California reporter, Ms. Haiti Cheng.
Good afternoon, everyone. How are you? That was a beautiful, beautiful ceremony, and I'm so glad to be a part of this very important and also a very impactful day. It is my goal to facilitate an impactful discussion, but perhaps more importantly, my job here is to make sure we're on time. So I'm going to take a seat. Our topic for this fireside chat is LA riots, political leadership then, now, and the future. And so it makes perfect sense that we have two esteemed guests with us today, two leaders who have led us, are leading us, and have their hopes to lead us in the future as governor. I'd like to welcome to the stage the Honorable Antonio Villaraigosa. He really needs no introduction. 41st Mayor of the City of Los Angeles. We know him also serving as on the City Council as well as the California State Assembly as Assembly Speaker, and of course, more recently, he was the member of President Obama's Economic Transition Team. So, welcome. And I also want to introduce State California Treasurer John Chung. He is the state's 33rd state treasurer, and he oversees trillions of dollars in transactions, and he has made transparency a top priority, not just as treasurer, but in his previous role as state controller. So welcome, Mr. Chung. Let's talk about the numbers. The LA riots. By the time the violence ended, more than 50 people had died, 2,400 injured, more than 12,000 arrested, and nearly $1 billion of property was destroyed. That's billion with a B, $1 billion. I want to ask you, where were you April 29th, 1992, and what goes through your mind when you hear those numbers?
Well, first of all, I want to thank you for once again commemorating what happened 25 years ago. The last time I was here was for the 20th. It's great to be here again at the Oriental Mission Church. I was, like so many people, watching TV. I was in the office. I started watching TV right after the verdict and saw a lot of what transpired, particularly around Normandy and Florence. And I think, like so many people, was in shock at the kind of wanton violence that we saw. But as I said earlier at a similar event at First AME earlier today, although we talk a lot about the carnage, the violence, what's testing, the racial divisions, I try to remind people of the stories. The story of Curtis Yarborough and Bobby Green, who came to the defense of Reginald Denny. The story of a man named Rodney, they don't remember his last name, who came to the defense of Larry Tarvin, who was beaten to a pulp. The minister who stood up and said, if you're gonna kill him, kill me, when Fidel Lopez was getting beat. the story of people who came to defend the Korean businesses, the people who came to clean up the city. That's what I think we need to recall as well. You know, I said earlier today that we still haven't ended poverty or racism, the prison pipeline, some of the things that kind of helped to ignite those riots and disturbances, the rebellion, SAIGU. But let's be clear, no city has. And I think it's important that we celebrate that we're here today, remembering 25 years ago.
Absolutely, and those are important stories to tell as well, not just for the 25th anniversary, but for future, certainly years to come. I won't say how old I was, but I was in school at the time that it happened, and I do remember my best friend next to me. She's half Korean, half black. And I looked at her, and even at that young age, she felt conflicted. She felt anger. She felt mistrust. She felt trust. And so all of these emotions were, even at the young age of 12 years old, that we could all feel, right, as part of this community. Treasurer Chung, question for you as well. When you think of the numbers, 2,400 injured, 12,000 arrested, $1 billion in property damage. What goes through your mind, and where were you, April 29th, 1992?
Yeah, so the position I hold today is the state treasurer, right? So I'm a numbers guy. My whole public life has been in dealing with numbers, Board of Equalization, state controller, state treasurer. So when you talk about the numbers, what we don't account for, and Antonio, I care about this very passionately, is what's the psychological toll? What's the human toll, right? We have those lives, the 53 lives that were lost. We see the property damage, but what does it do to the spirit, the heart, the imagination of the people? That's the larger toll. And so that's why, like Antonio and all of you, I am deeply appreciative that all of you came out because, right, this is the city of angels. We're trying to search and seek what's the best in each and every single one of us. And so when that happened, I was heartbroken. I'm oldest child of immigrant parents who came to this country from Taiwan, and we faced that discrimination in suburban Chicago. I'm named after John F. Kennedy. My childhood here was Martin Luther King. Right, my life was about civil rights, trying to make sure that all of us, and so is Antonio, is about fighting for equal and better opportunities for all people, tackling the poverty, the lack of affordable housing, making sure that Los Angeles doesn't continue to grow more segregated. And so a later part of my life, I worked in public service, and at that particular juncture, I was working for Congressman Mel Levine, who's running for the US Senate. So we were watching television. We stayed in the campaign office all night. But what was really disturbing, what reinforced that next morning, because we were at 3rd and Crescent Heights, and as I looked to the west, I saw the armed forces, right, and I don't know if they were police or armed security that the mall had. There was just a wall going into Beverly Hills, right? We shouldn't have those walls. We shouldn't have those walls back then. We shouldn't have those walls today.
Absolutely. We see those images. The intersections that look more like war zones, and it is certainly important to show those pictures and show that video so we don't forget, right? And so history doesn't repeat itself. Of the properties destroyed, we know that many of them were Korean-owned businesses. Despite the fact that Korean American merchants were victimized, many people in the community believe that the mainstream did not care because of the Asian Americans' lack of visibility and political power. Was the Asian community left behind?
I think very clearly, there certainly was an isolation. I recall, and very similar to what John said, there was a police presence to block entry into Beverly Hills and West Hollywood, but not around Koreatown. What was then Koreatown, has now grown since then. And I think there was, because of language and other issues, a real sense that, particularly in the Korean American
Test
community,
1 2
that,
test test.
nobody cared. And out of that spawned, as you well know, a number of organizations that began to advocate and say, hey, look, you know, we come here to work, to open up our businesses
Yeah,
like
sure,
everyone
sure,
else.
yes. Test
We're
1 2
struggling.
test.
We want to make
Testing
it.
1 2.
We
Test,
don't
test,
come
test.
here
Yeah,
with
that's pretty good.
some animus toward
Perfect, hang on.
any group, and I think
Let me know when.
it was
I'll
lost
do a couple of things.
to
Can we
too many,
hear?
that
Talking
notion.
about the gathering here.
Treasure
at this
Chung.
church.
Yeah,
It's on
the
way right
Korean
now. It's a
American
commemorative
community,
service.
along with so many emerging communities,
Michelle,
they're
Michelle.
disconnected and
You need to
disenfranchised.
hear.
The institutional infrastructure wasn't inclusive, and so you had many incredible leaders from the Korean community, lay and religious. Angela O was an outspoken advocate
Sure.
because we weren't connected. A lot of that work we do today is to make sure that
Yes,
we
we
repair
are
that
here in
breach.
Koreatown
I
talking
am so
about the
excited.
service,
My
the
dear
commemorative
friend,
service.
and we
Okay.
worked really hard to get him elected, David Rue. When David ran, the institution was against him, right? But today, David is helping to transform the city of Los Angeles. They're opening up the gateway, so it's not just elected officials, but appointed officials, private sector corporate leaders, to make sure not just Korean Americans, but African Americans, Latinos. This is an incredibly diverse city, but it's, again, in many respects,
Hey,
still
I'm
very
here, man.
segregated. So we're going to have to reach harder and look very differently. One of the things that I was very passionate about was early on, civil rights. How do people look at each other, and how do they feel about each other? So I had a good friend who was a friend of Beverly Tatum, and one of the things that I used to participate in every year, or try to still participate, is the Martin Luther King Parade. And then I would go home. Back then, they used to have Oprah, and then Antonio and I and others would go to the Southern Christian Leadership Conference dinner. And one episode of Oprah had Beverly Tatum talking about African American
yes,
kids,
when I
Latino
say,
kids, Asian kids,
Prevent
white
similar
kids, and how they
unrest, you
view
can
each
roll
other,
the VO, prevent
right, and
similar
part of them is
unrest,
social
and then for
identity theory.
SOT,
So
I
part
will
of this
say,
repairing and healing of the heart and building a better
of the
future
riots,
is
of the
we
riots.
have to look at each other, what we have in our commonalities, and celebrate what makes us special.
Absolutely. We talk a little bit about how far we have come, how much healing has happened, how much progress we have made. Yet there is still a myth out there, and it's the myth that is M3, right? Myth of model minority. We don't need help, right? Our communities are doing fine. We're great. We can do it on our own. How are you going to help combat that?
So today, it's in all my offices, we've always tried to build the infrastructure that creates stronger communities. When I was at the Board of Equalization, I started to do free tax seminars, especially for low-income folks, because a lot of this divide between us is socioeconomic, right? So it's feeling that the pie's not big enough for our hopes and greatest aspirations. So how do we, on an individual level, take care of people? But I've always really invested the resources in building stronger communities. So I started at the Board of Equalization free tax seminars for religious organizations so that they can protect people in their community, free nonprofit seminars. And again, thank you to Antonio. Antonio helped participate in some of those seminars that I helped create. So how do we alleviate that poverty? And today it looks like affordable housing, lack of equal access to great education. That Harvard study, if you take a poor child and put them in a higher opportunity, higher income community,
Sure.
they will thrive as well as everybody else. So that's what we're trying to focus on, try to build strong infrastructures so anybody can grow up to be anything they want to be.
Same question for you, Mr. Villaraigosa.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, maybe because not enough of us interact with one another, some people don't, they see Asians as one group. They don't realize they're Koreans and Chinese and Thai and Filipinos and Southeast Asians, obviously, and Hmong and Cambodian and some,
Giovanna, a
you
real
know,
show
if
of
they're
community,
older and
unity here.
immigrant
The
and less
Korean
educated,
American community
they
brings
have
together
some of
a
the
lot
issues,
voices to
same issues
discuss
that
some of the
African
issues of
Americans
concern. You can
and
see right now
Latinos
on the stage
who are
we have
older,
discussion is underway. Former
less
Mayor
educated
Antonio
and poor
Villaraigosa,
have.
former
So
LA Mayor.
these are the stereotypes that we have. And for those of us who have had the honor of being able to go through these communities, we realize they're not homogeneous. You know, they're not all alike. And we've really got to understand that and commit ourselves to resourcing as John has. And let me just say what an honor it is to be with John, because I have a great deal of respect for him. And I think both of us have always been at a place where we extend the hand to a stranger and tried to be uniters. And I think that's important right now. And why I'm proud that you're all here on a Saturday afternoon is we hear a different noise in Washington, D.C. right now.
Sure.
A very divisive noise. A noise that divides. Must be me. Whoops.
It could be me.
Testing.
Test, test, test.
So that must mean I'm finished. No, I think when we're both close to the mic.
Yeah. Well, I failed with my job as keeping time on this because they're asking us to wrap. So a round of applause for our wonderful panelists here today. Thank you so much for the insightful conversation. And let the conversation continue, not just on stage, but beyond. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Friends, I suspect we just heard from the next governor of California. Best wishes to you both. Without further ado, we're going to change it up a bit and we're going to have a musical performance. Join me in welcoming Miss Misha Hoyt.
May the Lord bless and keep you. May His grace and His face shine upon you. May the Lord lift up His countenance upon you and give you peace. And give you peace. Yivarechecha Adonai v'yishmerecha. Ya'er panav elecha v'yichuneka. Yisa Adonai panav elecha. V'yasem lecha shalom. V'yasem lecha shalom. This is the way you shall be blessed from day to day. He'll be your rest. May the Lord bless and keep you. May His grace and His face shine upon you. May the Lord lift up His countenance upon you and give you peace. And give you peace, and give you peace, and give
Thank you so much, Misha. Before moving on to the next part of our program, we wanted to acknowledge congressional candidate Jimmy Gomez and Assemblymember Jimmy Gomez. Unfortunately, he had a scheduling conflict and could not join us today. Nonetheless, we'd like to thank him for his efforts in supporting the SAIGU campaign. We're going to turn our attention to our next fireside chat with members of law enforcement. We're going to ask Ms. Hetty Chang to join us again as a moderator. Thank you so much.
That was quick. This time I have my stopwatch. And I'm told that we have to keep the mics up to prevent the crazy noise that we just heard back there. Hello again. This is another fireside chat. This one is called LA Riots, Law Enforcement, Then, Now, and the Future. And so we have our law enforcement leaders here from our past, present, and future. I'd like to welcome to the stage Chief Kelly Fraser. She's a chief with the Special Operations Division with the LA Sheriff's Department. She's a 21-year veteran with the department, and she was there at the LA riots. Welcome.
Thank you.
We also have the honor of having with us today LAPD Deputy Chief Dennis Cotto. He too is a veteran law enforcer. He began his career with the LAPD in 1987. He's currently in operations at the West Bureau as the commanding officer, and he's the highest ranking Asian officer within the LAPD, and he too was a young law enforcer during the riots. Thank you both. Time starts now.
We'll help you.
Okay. We've seen a lot of polls leading up to this 25th anniversary, 25 years ago today. And I'll point to one in particular done by LMU, the Center for Study of Los Angeles. They've been doing this survey for every 5 years since the riots. And for the first time, more Angelenos think that the possibility of a riot happening again is possible. So 6 out of 10 people surveyed believe that something like the riots could happen in the next 5 years. My question for both of you, could the riots happen again today? Yes, no, and why?
You want me to take that?
Sure.
I think that survey is accurate in that I was a 5-year police officer when the riots occurred. I was stationed at 77th Division, and that's where Florence and Normandy was. I worked that night when the verdict was read. I worked that night in front of Parker Senate when it burned. Leading up to that momentous day, or not momentous, but that day of April 29th, we knew as young officers that something was amiss. We knew that the community was angry. What we were angry was that our bosses didn't feel that same concern. They was not getting the same communication that would work in the street knew was going to happen. I still see the same type of anger now that we saw back then, and it does very much concern me. I'm scared all the time. Black Lives Matter, the issue of excessive force, those are the same repeating, recurring types of anger and issues directed at law enforcement that we saw back in '92. We're very careful, and we are, I think, for the LAPD, I won't speak for my partner, but I think it's similar. A lot of the law enforcement executives are aware of that. I grew up and I've been scarred, and I would use the word scar because a scar is something that you will remember by looking at that. I was scarred by what happened in '92. And so for my 30 years, I've been working toward making our department better at community relations, better at being open, better at explaining what we do so that I don't go back to something like '92. And I think, as you see currently, those issues as they occur, shootings of an unarmed minority, that we as a department have been better at communicating, at reaching out. I have so many more community partners at my level than I believe my bosses did back in '92. So I think that is a very accurate assessment of where we are right now.
Chief.
I too agree with Chief Cato. I think You know, I've been on 31 years. 21, I think, is what was originally. I've been on 31 years, and I too was out there working the night the riots started. And I was on the verge of being a 30-year-old woman working the streets. And prior to the riots, just building up that percolation that was happening, you could feel it as a young deputy sheriff. And I signed up for this job truly, as naive as I signed up truly to be a public servant, to care for the communities that I work around, to care for the humanity of what, you know, of everyone, the dignity of everyone. So as a 5-year deputy sheriff working the streets, it hurt my heart to see what was going on. I too was out there. I was shot at working the street that night when it happened. I was scared just as equally as we all were. And it was very hurtful for us to not see that this was a big deal to us in the department. And I know Sheriff McDonald and every sheriff, Sheriff Block, Sheriff Baca, Sheriff McDonald, you know, where we are now is really is a testament that, as he said, the leadership back then, it was very laxed. And I can tell you, I remember my captain was very old school in how he thought. He was a good captain, great captain in a lot of ways, but I see now where we are as far as the leadership, executives that are in positions that can influence a brand new deputy working the streets. The leadership is more engaged in what's really truly happening in the communities. They're more out. They're out in the streets more than they ever. They're not sitting behind a desk. They're involved. They're listening to the pulse of their commands. And but I do believe that we would be naive if we're all sitting here thinking that this couldn't happen again. I mean, we have a philosopher that says, if you don't pay attention to the past, you're condemned to repeat it. And so we have to stay diligent and very vigilant in how we perform and how we task ourselves moving forward. But it really is about collaborating with the communities and preventing every chance we get. Anytime something happens, we have to address it immediately. Transparency, get out there. So again, we can't be naive that this wouldn't happen again, because it could.
And I think a lot of people will agree, just even based on the polls that have been done recently. You know, the riots, they've been characterized as so many things, one of which is the law enforcement's darkest days, right? We've heard so many stories time and time again, and these are just sound bites from our own coverage from the archives back then. You know, some of the sound bites were LAPD was AWOL. Law enforcement, where were they? Did not come for days. Was the community forgotten? We talked about that a little bit with the fireside chat, the first one, but was it forgotten? And, you know, if it can happen in the next few years, how is the response going to be different 25 years later?
Go first. Hetty, that's a great question. So, as a young officer back then, I think our department lacked the courage at the upper level to really go out there and help. What we were sworn to do is to protect the community. I think back then they were protecting the image of the LAPD, and they didn't want to be seen on TV using what they would believe was excessive force to quell this riot. Initially, at the onset, we had officers at Florence and Normandy. We had officers that were engaged with the group. We had Metropolitan Division just coming off the freeway, ready to come in and back. But the captain pulled them all back. And the captain said, everybody go back to 54th and Arlington, which was the scheduled collection, what we would call a staging area. Mm-hmm. I left downtown after I was in front of Parker Center because I was booking someone at the time when the riots broke out. Stayed there while the uprising happened in front of Parker Center. As soon as that finished, I went back to 77th Division and was told to go to 54th and Arlington, which was the staging area. What I saw there was frustrated officers, frustrated my partners, because the command was not letting us out. They were just keeping us there. So what ended up happening, about 4 of us, 4 squad cars, went out the back gate and said, we're going to go out there and do what we can, despite what was being done inside this command center. I think what you're going to see now is this department, because every one of my peers, every deputy chief, everybody at the uppermost command of LAPD had been there during the 92 riots. We will not make that mistake again. We will always engage. Our first job is to protect the community. You will see a quicker response. You will see a more rapid response. We are very diligent now. We learned a lot of lessons about how to manage crowds, how to make arrests in crowd. We no longer, back when I was a young officer, everybody in that crowd was a bad guy. We dealt with that crowd as if everybody in it was out there to hurt officers, were out there to hurt the community. So you saw uses of forces that were just generalized. Now we are so much smarter in that we want to identify the perpetrator that's in the crowd and not really, the other folks that are out there are just expressing their anger, their frustration. They aren't really there to damage a community or hurt someone. So we are very targeted in trying to quell and take out of that mix, that agitator, that person that is breaking the law without violating the rights of the people around them. So I think you will see a different response now than we did 25 years ago.
Chief?
My assignment now is the Special Operations Division, and in that I have command of planning events, man-made events, natural disasters. We're in the midst right now of planning for Monday's event, May Day's event. It's a large event. It happens every year, and as Chief was saying, it's allowing folks to express their First Amendment rights. We're going to have over 250,000 people converging into the downtown area. I can tell you, and I'm so proud of this, the planning efforts that have gone into preparing for this day has been phenomenal. The partnerships, the collaboration, just the willingness to turn to your partners to get what we need done to protect everybody's rights out there, performing and really demonstrating their First Amendment rights. What I'm even more so impressed with is the relationship that law enforcement has with the organizers and really coming together to plan the event so it's successful. It's not violent. It is going to be a wonderful event to allow us to express how we feel. We're in a very volatile environment right now. It goes back to the first question.
Sure.
But it really takes a lot of pre-effort, by design, to get together and plan for these and do everything we can to mitigate them. So I think, as the chief said, is also we have the strategy's different. We provide more training for our personnel to understand how to prepare for that. We even have better training for a cadre of our officers, our deputies, that are really designed to handle those events in a very, very strategic, very safe, keeping in line with the thread that we're all in to protect their rights, their civil liberties. So you are going to see a different response, a quicker response if we do have that ignition, that catalyst. But all the pre-planned events, the coordinated efforts, the community outreaches that we have, it's not an aloof process. It's a very dedicated and committed process. And so I think, our hope, and we're real proud of Los Angeles as a whole and how we have performed. Now, can we do better? Absolutely.
Sure.
We can't be naive to that, but we're moving in a much more succinct, very organized manner.
And I imagine that each planning, when it comes to events, is a learning lesson, right?
Oh.
Absolutely.
I just want to end with one more question. 1992, did it change everything? Did it change nothing?
You want to?
For me, it was very formative. It changed me personally. It changed the community. It changed the way we did business. It changed, and it was as sad as and very tragic as that event occurred, and I think we heard earlier tonight, out of ashes came wonderful gifts. And so, yes, it did change. Now, we have to look at it, everything historically, you should look at it as opportunities for you to be better at what you're doing, and how you perform, and how you conduct yourself, and what your expectation as a public servant is towards the community. So we have changed, and I believe a lot more needs to be changed, but from my perspective, it was positive.
Deputy Chief, did it change everything? Did it change nothing?
I think both. So let me explain myself. Did it not change things? It didn't change me. It affected me, but I think I was always compassionate with the community. I was a little bit different coming in. I was older when I came out to the police department. And I think my life experiences up until then, I was not as heavy-handed, and I will say for sure there were officers that were heavy-handed, and there were officers that treated minorities differently because they were minorities. But I'm a minority, right? So how I worked in South LA for 5 years was different than some of my peers. So did it not change me? No, I still police the same way. I still believe I'm compassionate, I'm thoughtful, I'm caring. And I will say I had peers that were the same way. So did it not change us? The people you see in position of influence now in our department, I don't think they were changed. They were affected by it. We took those lessons and learned from it, but I didn't change as a person. Now, did it change things? Absolutely. It changed the department. It changed the way we look at working with communities. It did change our tactics. It changed a lot of what we are a very much different LAPD than we were back in '92. So I think in both, I could say both. I could make an argument both ways, that it doesn't change some things, and it affected change in a lot of other ways too. So both ways.
Sure. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. And I see Hayden hovering over here. So, let's not let the discussion stop here at the stage, but continue it beyond. Thank you both so much, Deputy
Thank you.
Chief and Chief Richard.